Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our first discussion on Born in Blackness, Africa, Africans, and the Making of the Modern World, 1471 to the Second World War, by Howard W. French, with Euclid Public Library and the East Cleveland Public Library, and sponsored by the Friends of the East Cleveland Public Library and Friends of the Euclid Public Library. I'd like to introduce you all to our host, Ms. Carla Bowman.
Hello, thank you for joining us this afternoon for our program. My name is Carla Bowman. I'm the Adult Services Manager at the Euclid Public Library. And I'm very honored today to lead our discussion of the book Born in Blackness, Africa, Africans and the Making of the Modern World, 1471 to the Second World War. And tonight is the first in a series of 3 discussions. We'll discuss the first half of the book or so today. On February 9th at 4 p.m., we'll discuss the second part of the book. And then on February 23rd, that's Thursday, February 23rd, we're very honored to have the author, Howard French, join us for a discussion. So we'll have the chance to hear his experience writing the book and ask any questions we have about what we've learned about the book. So that is promises to be a great program there. I wanted to just tell you a little bit about the author. Howard French is a career foreign correspondent and global affairs writer and the author of 5 books, 4 works of nonfiction, and 1 work of documentary photography. He worked as a French-English translator in the Ivory Coast in the early 1980s and taught English literature at a university there. His career in journalism began as a freelance reporter for the Washington Post and other publications in West Africa. He joined the New York Times in 1986 and worked as a metropolitan reporter with the newspaper for 3 years. And then from 1990 to 2008, reported overseas for the Times as bureau chief for Central America and the Caribbean, West and Central Africa, Japan, the Koreas, and China. He's the president of the board of directors of the IRIN News Agency. He was a 2011-2012 fellow for the Open Society Foundation, and he also received an honorary doctorate from the University of Maryland. The book, Born in Blackness, that we're discussing this evening was published in 2021, and it won the Museum of African American History, the Museum of African American History Stone Book Award for 2022. And this is an award, I wasn't even aware of it, but it is an award that recognizes the most exemplary contemporary scholarship and writing within the field of African American history and culture. So with that, I thought we could just each introduce ourselves, if you'd like, and tell us a little bit, give us your name and share any first impressions you had of the book. Anyone want to go first?
I'll go first. I'm Stephanie Tyus from East Cleveland Public Library, and very excited to be participating in the discussion. I will say that from the very beginning of the book, and I've written this out so wouldn't forget to say it, this quote from French: "It would be unusual for a story that begins in the wrong place to arrive at the right conclusion." And having read that sentence, I said, I'm going to see this through. I had to read and reread several of the passages, but that was just very impactful and something that has resonated with me.
Thank you.
I'll jump in. This is Ross Cockfield. I'm the fiscal officer here at the East Cleveland Library. I found this book to be a fascinating read. I kind of place it with some other books that I've read that kind of fill in a lot of the gaps that are typically unknown. And I'm just excited to be participating, and we'll just look forward to making whatever comments I can make and listening to whatever comments others have to make.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Let me just jump in and add. I'm going to
Sure.
add here. Okay,
Please
I
do.
think that one of the things that I find exciting, fascinating, exciting about the book is the fact that it puts the African slave trade in particular in its rightful place in terms of how the world transitioned from a medieval world, particularly Europe, how it transitioned from a medieval world to an industrialized and then a modern world. And one of the things that historians fail to do is to put the role of the slave trade and the role that Africans played in the creation of enormous wealth that fueled the development of Europe. You know, we come to see Europe as a place where you have modern conveniences and all of the things that represent the modern world. The same thing with the United States, the same thing with America. But the development and the means to create that wealth, the means to create that type of civilization goes unnoticed or goes undiscussed. And this is certainly one of the few books that I've come across that kind of hits the nail on the head as far as I'm concerned in terms of the place and the role that the slave trade and the wealth that it developed or the wealth that it created, how it fueled the development of Europe.
Absolutely. That's one of the themes of the book, I would say. Anyone else want to share?
Yes,
Your thoughts?
I'm Dolores Pinchot, and I certainly got a lot of information out of the book that I was wondering, why didn't our textbooks in school talk about some of this? I was especially interested in all the tribes in Africa and the wealth that they created among their society. And then, you know, of course, George Washington and the Monticello and Jefferson. I've been to their houses, but you never heard any of that relationship and how the workers there, the slaves there, added to the wealth and made the wealth. Thank you.
Well, I will definitely say that was one of the themes of the book, that Africa's role in world history has been undertaught and even erased, he argues, I think very well. And I think one of the questions I was going to throw out to us as a group is, what were you taught in school about Africa? Or were you taught about Africa in school?
Well, nothing. How about that?
Yeah.
Nothing. No, nothing. I mean, and I'm not being, I'm being facetious, but Africa was people running around with bones in their nose, large lips with platters, skirts, straw skirts, spears, Tarzan, wild animals, absolutely nothing. You know, the largest continent on the planet,
Right.
if not the largest, second largest continent on the planet, most populated, nothing.
Yeah, we learn nothing of it. Yep.
You've written out half the population of the world for what? For, you know, what's the reason? I mean, we know the reason, but you know, nothing.
Now, I will say that we're probably of a similar age. I don't know if it's any better now for students, and I don't know if anyone has any maybe younger children or grandchildren who, knows anything about that. But yeah, I think that our age, we were not taught much about Africa's role in world history.
I can say the same thing for the younger generation. We weren't. I'm 30, so maybe hopefully kids now are, but we were not.
That's interesting too, because at this particular time, they are erasing some of the social issues that arise from our presence in this country. And so and as I got older, I'm 70 years old now, and as I've gotten older through the past years, I remember going through these Cleveland schools and elementary, junior high, and only understanding anything about not necessarily Black history, but Black people. When we had a Black history teacher arrive during, I think, during the 9th or 10th grade, and kind of opened up our eyes to a lot of things, and showing Birth of the Nation, which is the first Birth of a Nation, which is the first time I've ever seen anything like that in my entire life up to that point. But I came to the conclusion some time ago at my current age that the system was not necessarily education, it was indoctrination. I still hold that to this day, because I look and listen to what the children today are learning, and it does not have any sort of an emphasis on African contribution to the planet, or in particular to this country. So I think it really depends upon where you get your education at. Because here in this country, it was designed a certain way, and I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
I think what others have said, that we learned nothing about Africa when I was coming through the school system either, and even thinking about during college years when having my minor in Black studies, really having to design your own curriculum, so to speak, through independent study to try to, generate knowledge and conversation, and to think about the absence of this teaching throughout. It brings me to another phrase in the book, historical erasure, because to tell the truth would be to admit that on the backs of African people, this country was built. I think about, as it discusses about the Portugal and the sugar trade and all of this, it was just so, I use the word I started out with, so impactful, so deeply upsetting. A lot of what many of my contemporaries know is through our own reading, but what French has uncovered, I just had to stop and sit back a number of times and say, I had no idea about this piece of it. And as to my final comment is as to what the youth are being taught now, it may be a little bit better, but because of the absence of bits and pieces of truth, it's still a false narrative. So as one of my colleagues said, more indoctrination than education. I think that that's still going on even today.
So I want to ask you a question, if you don't mind. You said that you had to create your own knowledge and look for your own resources. Were there many resources that talked about this? I feel like it's only in the last maybe 20 years that there's been more scholarship done on these different approaches to looking at history.
No, there weren't a lot of resources in terms of you really had to dig, but I was fortunate, the college that I attended, that individuals who were brought in sometimes to help to mentor the independent studies they had came in with a wealth of knowledge that they were willing to share. And so it really piqued the curiosity and made me want to know more. So I would say as a result of that, what I have been, the knowledge I have been able to acquire has been through really deep dives and knowing better how to go about doing that research as a result of what I experienced as an undergrad.
Mhm. Yeah. Thank you. Well, I am pleased that we're seeing more scholarship done on these different, different approach to looking at history. So there have been several books like that, which I think are really, it's great that they're out there now and hopefully people can access them. One of the ideas that I thought was just bizarre that's related to this is there's a phrase somewhere on page, I think 40, it says, he says that it's always finding a way around Africa rather than acknowledging that there's anything of interest there persists today in book after book on the topic of the age of discovery. And that Africa is presented as merely an obstacle in the rush to get to Asia rather than having any sort of valuable resources there. And I just thought that was such an odd idea. Like you said, it's one of the largest continents, but in my education, it was just presented as this landmass that was in the way of their exploration to get somewhere else. So.
But I think that what Dr. French has done is dispel that myth, because I think, as he points out, for maybe 20 to 30 years or so, from the time that I guess Columbus traveled to the west, or traveled west, and then from that time to, I don't know if I have the dates right, but he said there's roughly a 20 or 30 year time span that really kind of goes not talked about or unnoticed, if you will, where the Portuguese were actually exploring up and down the west coast of Africa, searching for gold, and as opposed to the common narrative that they were searching for silks and whatever in China. But he points out that no, they had a different. There was actually something going on differently that is not really talked about. And once they found the gold, and they found the way for them to use the slaves in order to develop the sugar plantations, and as they say, the rest is history.
Yep. Well, and that was one of my questions. So my version of the book is a paperback here, and it does have some questions in the back, and one of them is related to sugar. So that's probably towards the halfway point of the book. And the question was, what's the impact of sugar, which was produced by enslaved Africans, on the world economy?
Oh, it was huge. It was huge.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have the numbers, but I mean, sugar did to the let's just say to the medieval world what cotton has done to the industrial world, and both of them being driven by slave labor. No, it was huge. I mean, it transformed Europe. Yeah, it was huge. I got mine all.
So you got a paperback too?
No, I got a hardback.
Yeah.
I got a hardback. Actually, I got this, and I purchased a couple of copies for friends and relatives. But no, I'm going back through it again as a result of our discussion to highlight more, underline more, really begin to digest, a lot of things that he's talked about.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I think that was great about the book, is that there's lots of little bits, like learn little tidbits. Like I'd never heard of the Catalan Atlas, which is a famous map from the early Middle Ages. And so it was really fun to go through, and I would like Google the things and look them up on to learn more about that. What, does anyone have anything that they'd like to share that you learned from reading the book?
Well, I read the book about 1619 and some of the first African settlements up further north. But the idea of, I had learned in school about the rum and sugar, the triangle trade there in the Caribbean. And this went in more detail and kind of illustrated, the very little bit that I had learned. But the idea of the tribal religion, the tribes had marvelous the way they described them, their religion and their cultures. They're very shamanistic. They had the holy men or the mystics in their tribes who were the leaders, spiritual leaders. And this whole idea, more Eastern than Western, their religion. So this was something that I was surprised at.
Anyone else had anything that you learned that you'd like to share?
When he talked about Mansa Musa, okay, and that's something I really want to explore. But I mean, the fact that this man, the wealthiest man to have ever lived, travels across Africa and just distributes this enormous amount of wealth and drives the price of gold down, which for 10 years, which piqued everybody's interest. They said, well, where is this gold coming from? And that according to Dr. French, I guess that's what kicked off the exploration, because they had to find, the Portuguese and maybe then the Spanish decided to try to find out where's this gold coming from. So they began exploring or trolling the west coast of Africa. And so that story, I guess what precipitated this exploration is something that I really want to get back into. I want to look at that more closely. But I think it's fascinating that he pointed that out as being the catalyst for the Portuguese and the Spanish to begin the exploration of the coast of Africa. So I thought that was, fascinating. That was a fascinating piece of information.
It was, and something I knew nothing about. So that's something I learned as well. It was rather dramatic as I believe he goes to Egypt. And his experience there was really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, what we fail. I mean, we wind up. We meaning, I think in general, we wind up getting caught up in facts, dates, times, that kind of thing. But we rarely put things together and say, okay, well, this event had this kind of impact, and by it having the whole notion of cause and effect. And so as a result of Mansa Musa making this pilgrimage and distributing all this gold, it kicked off a chain of events that wound up causing the Portuguese to say, okay, well, let's find the source of this gold. And it was that whole series of events and circumstances that caused them to decide to explore the coast of Africa.
I find it interesting too, because I have not read the book, but I listened to this discussion to determine if I wanted to actually read the book. But it, to me, becomes obviously apparent just listening to how long it took for the information that we put in this book to be public and to be able to be shared throughout not just this country, but wherever the book has been published and sold. And to know that when you look at society as it's currently in its state that it's currently in, if it took that long, this long, for us to get that kind of information, you would have to come to a conclusion that that means that there's some group or some entity, something is manipulating information and making it available whenever they want people to finally understand it, which also leads me to believe, based on current world events, that the same people that did that are still doing what's happening now. Because if it took that long for us to be able to get facts, which they knew because the facts were there because somebody finally discovered them and put them in a book so that everybody could see them. So the people who actually were perpetrating these various forms of deception and to keep all this information away, they haven't went anywhere. They're still around. And they are still manipulating society in various ways that the consequences of these maneuvers that are currently taking place will be read about in decades to come. So that's what fascinates me about the uncovering of information, especially when you're looking backwards, because someone already knew this. It's not like this is brand new. The fact that it was documented and to be able to be assimilated away and put into a book means someone kept records and knew this information the entire time. Now, I also related, and I won't go too much longer, but I also related to the music industry and how the talents of musicians have been used to enrich and create a lot of wealth in ways. And then when the artists actually start talking about it, and the artists start to try to break those kind of chains, all of us have witnessed what has happened to them. With Michael, with Prince, and with others who have fought against, but it's another type of slavery is what I'm saying. And I think too that the way that the society, even what's going on right now, is still the manipulation of the general population by the same group of people, or whatever you want to call them, that were manipulating facts and information back then.
Well, two things. One, I would definitely recommend the book. I will say that it is not.
Oh, I intend to read it.
Yeah, it is divided up nicely into short chapters. So I read it over the course of several weeks, and it was nice to just pick it up, read a few chapters, and go on. So it's definitely readable. It is more scholarly in its approach, which is great. But back to your original comment there. So I think we were intentionally miseducated about back to the history of Africa.
No question.
Miseducated about the history of the world. So do we have any thoughts on why and what have the consequences been for that?
Are you speaking to me or just to
whoever wants to answer? I'll toss it out there.
Yeah, the misinformation that that we've been fed certainly supports the system of white supremacy that exists throughout the world, racism as it exists in the United States. These are, it's you feed people ignorance and you can manipulate them. It's very clear that you can manipulate people's actions if you miseducate them. So I think that's the why. That's the why, because those in power, those who are in positions of wealth, continue to seek wealth, gain wealth, pass wealth on,
maintain power.
Yes, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
These people are the ones that obviously seek to benefit and continue to misinform the general public about the history of mankind and the history of the world. And it's not to say that they're, knowing the truth makes you hateful or whatever you want to call it. But no, I think it's, if you know the truth, then you can obviously operate more clearly in life, and you have a stronger basis for relationship. So we're dealing with misinformation. As a matter of fact, I was watching news this morning, and what's his name? The governor of Florida. I can't think of his name.
DeSantis,
Is
Ron DeSantis.
DeSantis, right? DeSantis is attacking higher education down there. I mean, the whole notion of writing out true history is it's horrible. I mean, how does an educated man, someone who Harvard grad, I believe he's a Harvard grad. I mean, how do you do that? What's your motive? And these are the kinds of things that we have to combat. But certainly books like this, to the extent that they get well read, internalized, you're able to combat these the misinformers. I'll put it like that.
I don't think this book will be allowed to be distributed in the Florida
No,
school
no,
system.
no. He's not. I don't think he's read this book.
Or he read it. That's what he read it, or somebody that he knows read it. That's why it will not be on the list for public.
One of the things that was, going back to what's being taught today to the youth, one of the things that French brings forward is that how whole curriculums need to be rewritten, even on college campuses. And a book like this, to be read, but also to be discussed, to be debated, and to talk about the why. For me, it was a very basic why. It still exists today. The power, the greed, to tell the truth that people that were depicted, I think maybe Mr. Kaplan said this, some of the teachings that we learned in School of Africa, the primitive images, never bringing forth the culture, a place that was so wealthy that was the whole idea, to just decimate what they had. And I was thinking about one chapter, I think it's chapter 14, A Few Acres of Snow. And it talks about that in the mid 1800s, Europe possessed only 10% of the continent. And by 1914, they had 90%, and how can you be successful in doing that and continuing to perpetuate the same myths, the untruth? The racism is to not admit about the knowledge that really was gleaned from that continent. You have to start, and I go back to that sentence that just captivated me from the beginning, that it would be unusual for a story that begins in the wrong place to arrive at the right conclusion. And for me, that's really bottom lines it. So the more that we discuss, and to my brother's point about a book like this not being allowed in Florida, for voices to have to rise up and really advocate. I think the French's book, I was saying, wow, this should be required reading in sociology, anthropology, history classes at the college level, or even high school, in some of the programs. I'm going to stop because it's really, it had me so, and I'm still there, just processing this. Inherently, that a culture was destroyed, that people were robbed of their God-given wealth and made depicted to be less than human. And that same premise is what so many people are operating on today. So, French was willing to write the hard nonfiction, and I think we have to be willing to have those hard conversations, even when people don't want to listen.
Definitely agree.
Now, I would agree with Ms. Tyus that this should be required reading in high school. I mean, this is, if a high school student should be able to get through this book. And if you can't, then someone should help him out. But or her out. But I believe this should be required reading in high school.
That's why parental participation in a child's education is critical, because it will never happen within a society that's been manipulated for so long to guarantee certain outcomes. And I've came, and it may not be the right conclusion, but my reality that I've came to is that after you understand exactly what you're dealing with, then you know how to approach your own life to find a successful path to your own destination. Because it's not by accident, it's not by coincidence. These things we're talking about have been manipulated and done intentionally. And those same people that were pulling the strings from behind the scene back then are still alive and well and committed to continuing to deal with planet just as long as they can. I don't know if there's an expiration date on their rule and their ability to continue doing it. And the only way I see that it happening is by divine intervention. This is something else that can come along, because there are other books that are written that talk about other aspects of the human existence. But those people are still alive and well.
I think that one of the things that Carla mentioned at the beginning, just in giving some of the background of Dr. French, and I also, looked up and I was reading an article that he had written related to George Floyd and the different, the senseless killings that were going on. For me, his book has opened a door. You talk about divine intervention. In some ways, I see that this is such, because of the level of scholarly research, because of his background in, being a journalist from New York Times and the many different places that he lived. Although the book is written in a way, it's at such a high level, yet at the same time, between those lines, you can feel the investment, because as a Black man in America writing this book, having witnessed this, but he chronicles it in such a way that those who pride themselves on being scholars, they can't say, oh, this is some fly by night, it's methodical. I too wish he had gone, further, or maybe there'll be, a book that comes after this, but it is not something that can be ignored. And even looking at some of the comments and some of the reviews about the title, it's for me, and I am not saying this, just as a cliche, really life-changing, in that it brought some things that I thought I knew, that I could just put out the window. And although inherently, as a Black woman, I know I have lived so much of the history through my family, but it's another thing to be able to be proud to see it written in this way, which I feel an accurate and truthful account of what went on and at what cost.
There was one of the stories I'm sure you remember from the book that really struck me was there was a doctoral thesis written in 1938 by an Eric Williams. And he proposed that the explosion of wealth in the West was produced by the plantation complex in the 19th century, and that directly led to the West's prosperity early and the rapid industrialization of the West. So I thought that was interesting. And then, of course, the powers that be, don't really take him seriously. They work to disagree with what he says. And but I thought it was interesting that at such an early date, someone was making that argument. Do you remember that part of the book?
Capitalism and Slavery?
Yeah.
That's the name of the book, yeah.
Is it? Okay, very good, yes.
No problem.
So the ideas were out there already. It just takes such a long time before people, begin to, accept, I suppose. But the book did get great reviews, and a lot of the, I've looked at a lot of the different reviews, and they say, it's vitally important. It's essential reading for anyone with an interest in world history. It's shows a lot of the important role that Africa's played in the world economy. So I do think, to your point, Stephanie, that it is getting a lot of attention and it will be remembered and studied.
I do have some hope that with the young children today and young people, not children, who are protesting down on Cleveland Public Square, wanting, Black power and to be identified, that those people and the women that we have, Vice President, who is African American, and Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. So we have women who are leading as examples. So I have hope for the future that the new generation will take up and do better.
I do too, but all the indications to me, I'm not trying to be pessimistic, because I sincerely believe that it's going to take something in the nature of whatever you believe divine intervention to do to actually change this. Because we, in fact, the way that it has been designed is that we are not off course, we are on course. This is the way that it was designed to operate, because it was intentional that these people did the various things they do to be in the position that they're in today. It took a lot of planning. It took a lot of real heavy investment, not just with money, but in a lot of other ways to keep the society in the situation it's in with the United States and Europe. But when you look at the impact globally, the whole world fighting about something. And there seems to be no real interest in taking all of the scholarly power that we have on this planet, all of the technical resources that we have on this planet, all of the wealth that we have on this planet. But none of those people have decided to come together to figure out a way to have a social fabric that works for everybody. And for human beings, just basic human beings, to survive together and to live in a harmonious society. It seems quite the contrary when you look at it. You got the two most powerful men on earth fighting in somebody else's country because they don't want to directly fight each other. When you look at what has happened over the years, I still, and I don't have any inside knowledge of it, but it just seems to be a spiritual conclusion about pain, that it's going to take something like divine intervention. Because some of these people that are manipulating this stuff, based on what I've seen so far, they will be willing to destroy us all before they live in harmony and have the world in the place that it should be. A lot of Native Americans talk about the spiritual aspect of walking the planet and the responsibilities that humans have to Mother Earth, which we all live on. You find that totally absent. You watch CNN, watch MSNBC, watch Fox News. That's the furthest from discussion that they ever talk about. It's always conflict, confrontation. One thing, and it's constantly being fed to the society on a level that is so deep that it is subconsciously embedded in how people look at the earth as we live in. And you make heroes out of people who are really participating in the consistent process that exists back then and it exists right now. And in my mind, and it's going to be interesting for me to read this book. I'm glad I set into it because I really want to read it. I'm just saying it's interesting to look at it because we have every component that we need as a species to make this world entirely different.
Yes, thank you. One other point I wanted to bring up is that sprinkled throughout the book, the author includes his own travels to various locations. He did serve as a foreign correspondent, and he seems to have traveled the world. And how did you respond to those parts of the book?
Hi, everyone. I'm sorry I had to pop out. I didn't realize that one of my trustees was going to show up at exactly 4 o'clock. It's like, wait. I have been enjoying the little conversations because I am hoping in 2023 that this will be my year to visit Egypt, which has been a lifelong dream of mine. So just to think about the fact that he, like at the start of the book, he mentioned that his first trip was because of college. And, so we try, I think nowadays, to encourage our young people to participate in like study abroad with their school. Because I do think, as both of you guys, Dolores, and I'm sorry, I think your last name is Rashid. I don't know if Rashid is
Yes,
your,
yes.
as you guys were talking, I was just thinking about how important it is for some of these things are because we're so isolated. We don't take the time to travel and get to know other cultures. We don't take the time. Most of us don't travel out of our state, let alone out of the United States to kind of really see some of these things and really get a better understanding of what it all means. And of course, as we all know, our educational system is not set to help us to learn these things. So
Nice way of saying it.
it's not. I mean, most of when we were doing the 1619 discussions, I remember how many people kept saying, why didn't I learn this? Why didn't I know about this in high school?
Yeah.
Why am I just, as an adult, in my 40s, 30s or 40s or 50s learning about this? And it's been very intentional, like to make sure that we don't learn it, we don't know it. And I would just say not only about racism, but even women's rights. And we see all the things that are happening in Afghanistan, and it's horrible. It really is. So I'm glad we're doing this discussion together. And I have found his little tales a little fascinating and interesting, and just a reminder that we do need to encourage our young people to learn.
To your point, Casey, I had the opportunity to go to Ghana
Wow.
in 2019 and actually visit the dungeons. You can call them slave castles. Visit the dungeons. Go down into the dungeons. The one that I guess he refers to, Elmina. It was constructed in 1572, I believe, or 1472. I think 1472. Anyway, it was long ago. And but construction is it's amazing. It's amazing how it's still standing, and the people that take you through the tours, they explain how, I mean, they would pack. I mean, you just can't imagine being packed into a room with a small window, if you will, to provide ventilation. I mean, and you're packed in there until the slave ship is full, which could be 3 to 6 months, depending on how long it takes to get people into the dungeons and out onto the boat. So it's I don't want to say that in such a world of beauty as we have it, that I would suggest going there, because it's not the kind of tourist. I mean, it's not a fun and sun kind of trip, but I think it's worthwhile, and I would encourage everyone to go, because
Yes. I'll say, Ross, it was a big debate because my sister actually wanted to go to Ethiopia as the start of our African tours, because Ethiopia is I want to say one or the only country in Africa that was never colonized.
Right.
And, to really get a true understanding of an African country that from start to now hasn't had the influence of the European influence. And yeah, so I debated, like we were going back and forth, because I was like, because I'm hesitant to go to a country like Ghana and start my tour with the slave trade, because I struggle with that.
Well, Du
Yeah,
Bois,
I do, because it's like I cry at everything, Ross, and I don't want to be on vacation like crying.
well,
I wanted
W.E.
to
Du
add,
Bois, I mean, Du Bois was buried there. And they have a museum. They have a museum in the Capitol in his honor.
W.E.D. Du Bois was buried?
Yeah, yeah, that's he left. He
Okay.
threw his hands up. He threw his hands up to the United States and went to Africa. That's where he died.
Wow.
So
Did you know that before you went?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So his body, his body is buried there, and they have a museum and whatnot for him.
Mm-hmm.
And Ghana, for whatever it's worth, Ghana was the first country in Africa to declare its independence from colonialism.
Mm-hmm.
So it has a rich history.
Mm-hmm.
It has a very rich history. But again, to your point, it's not a sun and fun experience
Right.
by no stretch.
Yeah.
But you come away.
It was overwhelming when I visited the museum in DC, the African American History and Culture. It was very hard going through the initial part of the exhibit, and I'm glad they have it designed the way they have it designed, so that when you come out, you don't leave with the same heaviness and weight that you do when you enter.
Well, you can't
That's what I'm saying, Ross. I'm being honest. I'm being honest. I'm being
you
honest.
can't. You will carry this
answer
with
the
you. You will
question.
carry this with you for the rest of your life.
I'm being honest. I'm making my way slowly there, Ross.
I hear you. I hear you.
I enjoyed the part, I appreciated the fact that he went to other countries. I thought that was adding perspective from that he brought to his writing. So I thought that was good that he traveled to other countries. Just wanted to add that to answer your question.
Yeah, and he did include details. What I thought was really interesting and the saddest part of that was that very little of this history has been, there's no evidence of it. There aren't any landmarks. There's no, like, he would have to hunt and go far into,
Right.
I'm not sure what, but far inland to find, on an island to find the cemetery he's looking for. And he'd get there and there would be like a small little sign. It was really just not, I suppose that's part of the erasure, there's just not recorded. It's not marked. And I thought that was really sad.
Well, and colonization too, Carla, like when I was looking, I really wanted to beef up our African American children's collection.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, well, why don't I just reach out to the libraries in Africa? They probably got some good recommendations for us. And I remember her response back is that we face the same issue because of colonization. A lot of the titles on their shelves are European, just like in America.
Oh, wow.
Our library I want to say it's in Ghana, the first truly African-American library. I believe it just opened in Ghana maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And it's only titles by Africans. And I said in the whole continent, like it just broke my heart. Like, I was like, wow. I mean, so it was very intentional.
Yes.
To erase this history, to erase the contribution.
Casey, just to let you know, Felton and I worked with that group. They were originally from Cleveland, Ohio, who started that first public library in Africa. So they came through Cleveland Public to learn about, cataloging, any governance around that, and fundraising. So you're right. This is just opened 4 years ago.
What was it? The library in Ghana? Do you remember where it was?
I believe so. They were from Ghana.
Okay.
Well, a couple of you have mentioned the 1619 project, and this did remind me as I was reading this, because it really forced me to realize that I'd been lied to, or to realize that kind of opened my eyes to a different history. So Has anyone else read any other books like that that you'd like to recommend to the group? It just really forces you to look at things differently. No? Okay.
Well, I would say, I don't have one book in particular, but if you're ever studying World War I or World War II, don't just look at it from America's vantage point. Like, sometimes you have to
Yeah.
kind of look at all of the different perspectives and what was really going on. America's retelling of the stories makes America look really good. And it's just when I think when I was in college and we were studying World War I and World War II, it just, like you said, Carla, started to be eye-opening that it wasn't as cut and dry as America makes it out to be in some instances. And again, as we look at what's going on now and our involvement in different wars in different parts of the world, it's like America has a story. And American story is always gonna make yourself look good.
My uncle was on the Tinian Islands. He actually saw the Enola Gay and took a picture of it. My parents
Wow.
never talked about it. That was something that was not talked about. And I finally saw the picture, and I not only saw the picture, I found a letter he wrote, a normal letter home from the Tinian Islands. And he asked in a PS, how did the bomb go? We don't get newspapers here.
Wow.
Blew my mind, but the idea of how isolated and how we control news and all that.
Mm-hmm. That was the bomb, the plane that dropped the bomb.
I got another book to your question, Casey. The Half Has Never Been Told. And for one of the things that I found amazing in the book, and then it's kind of a tidbit, but we all know that slavery began on the East Coast, South Carolina, Virginia. Well, it matured in the southern part of the country, Mississippi, Alabama, cotton growing states. Well, what I didn't realize is that when cotton became cotton, slaves were marched from the East Coast to the cotton growing states.
Didn't know that.
And in some respects, or in some instances, they were ferried all the way around the coast to Louisiana and then brought in through Louisiana. But it never dawned on me that they were marched from one section of the country to another section to work. And we hear about stuff happening, but don't get the picture.
Mm-hmm.
We just don't get, if we talk about people picking cotton, well, how'd they get there? Where'd they come from? They came from the East Coast because they were marched in chains from one section of the country to another section. And so
We should look at doing East Cleveland and Euclid should look at the Monticello Plantation does virtual tours now, or virtual events with their tour guides. So folks who can't get all the way to Virginia can learn about slavery at Monticello. And right during COVID, when things started opening up, I got the chance to visit, and I remember riding up that hill to the top of the plantation, to the mountain, to the top of the plantation, and just really seeing, like you said, just kind of getting the visual of how the slaves are marched and how close the slave cabins were to the actual house that Thomas Jefferson lived in, or the mansion where he lived in, and how close in proximity these folks were living together. You know, it wasn't like it, you know, and where they believe like Sally Hemings, her room and stuff was, and just how close. And so when people would say, no, Thomas Jefferson wasn't sleeping with Sally Hemings, it was like when you see where his bedroom was in relationship to where she supposedly slept, I was like, oh yeah, it was some sleeping going on. And he had an outside door to his bedroom, like his bedroom has the main door, like, you know, you go in the bedroom. But most bedrooms don't have a door that lead directly outside, right? So Thomas Jefferson's bedroom has a door that leads right outside. And then he had Jimmy rig this lock so that he could lock the doors from his bed without having, now this, come on guys, this is back in the 1700s or whatever. This man had Jimmy rigged the lock so he didn't have to get out of the bed so he can lock the door. So
Wow.
when you see all those things, like you were saying, Ross, I was like, oh, it was a lot of shenanigans going on here.
Says shenanigans.
It was some shenanigans, I'm telling you. So, but unless you see the visual, Ross, like you were saying, it was just like, you can't imagine it. You can't.
Yeah.
So.
And I think that's what this book does a lot, is it fills in those details, and those details help you to understand how it really kind of fills in the picture for you. Well, we're coming up on 5 o'clock, so and that's the scheduled end of the program. Do you want to invite everybody to come back for the program on February 9th? That's in 2 weeks, maybe it's 3 weeks. Yeah, 3 weeks. Same time, 4 o'clock, and we'll talk about the last half of the book. And I'm really curious to see where the author takes it as far as, you know, getting more into, it's all done chronologically. So this will be covering like more into the 19th century. And I'm really, haven't gotten there yet, but I'm hopeful to hear about what he shares about the development of Africa's contributions in the other, you know, further along in time. So I guess we'll end the program now, and thank you all for attending. I really think we had a great discussion, and I'm glad we were able to, you know, expand from just the book to all the other issues surrounding the book. So I appreciate everyone's contribution, and we will definitely meet again on 3 weeks from now. All right.
Thank you for leading the discussion.
Thank you.